the day I almost lost him. So, Dad was at the PAM facility. This had to be, I don't know, I guess somewhere in the middle of March. And um, he seemed like he was progressing to a point at PAM, which is the rehab LTAC facility. But, it kind of digressed more and more. He became like a little less verbal. So they cleared him for food, so he started eating, but then it became less and less. Like, so he was at this PAM facility for, I don't know, maybe 5 to 6 days and like there was a quick change in like his talking, there was a quick change in his eating and like his mentality. And so probably like day 5, like he just got a little bit quieter, didn't say much. I asked the nurses, like, hey, how's he doing? He's like, he's just resting, not a lot's going on, like no energy. So he wasn't eating. Luckily he was still on TPN and fluids, so he was fine there. But like his energy levels went down really fast in the matter of like 2 to 3 days. So it was a Friday morning. I was at work and I got a phone call from a nurse named Randy, and he said that he's going to, I guess basically call Rapid or get my dad over to the emergency room because his hemoglobin levels were low. I said, okay, well, what does that mean? And he's like, well, his blood levels are really low and his hemoglobin level is like at 2.7. So I'm like, I really didn't know what that meant at the time. He's like, well, we're going to get him and we're going to transfer him over to Mountain View so he can go to the ER and get checked out. I'm like, okay. And so it didn't really hit me on what that meant. So I called him back and I was like, okay, what does this mean? Like, is this serious? Like, yeah, he needs to go get checked out. So I'm like, okay, so I'm going to leave work. I'm going to go meet Dad at the hospital. So I did that as soon as like I get to Mountain View Hospital a little bit early, and he hasn't even been basically put into a room yet. And so I put my name in, and they said they'd call me as soon as he's ready. So it took probably easily 30 to 45 minutes for him to just get settled. And when I get back there, my dad's, his hands and wrists are like curled up, and he, his face is kind of really sunken in, and it was the hardest thing I think I've ever seen. Like, he's never been in that state, so something was obviously wrong, to where like it was super serious. So the first doctor comes in, she's nice but very serious, and she's like, your dad's, lost a lot of blood. He's internal bleeding. Like, his hemoglobin levels are really low, some of the lowest we've ever seen. Like, okay, that's not good. And then Dr. Nicky comes in, another guy. He goes, we're going to give your dad about 5 units of blood, which is a lot from my understanding, and he's going to need it. So do you mind signing the paperwork for the blood transfusions? And I said, no, it's fine. Like, let's whatever we have to do to get him taken care of. And so that day I sat with Dad while they rushed him blood, and he, the only way when you're internal bleeding like that for stuff to come out is obviously you pass it through a bowel movement. And so that was one of the worst things I've seen, is that, he had all of this internal bleeding and then he had to pass it all through just a horrific bowel movement. Sorry, Dad, I love you, but it was rough. So I immediately got the nurses and like, hey, like, Dad, he needs help. He needs to get cleaned up. They're like, okay, we got him a room. He's going to get transferred. I'm going to go clean him up, but he's going to need like an hour and a half. So I'm like, all right. So there's not more that I could have done at this point. So I'm like totally lost. Didn't know if he was going to come out of it by the way that the doctor sounded, honestly. Like, I was pretty shook up. And so I just decided to walk across the street. There was a Las Vegas brewery across the street. It was nice, not bad, but just kind of stuck in my head. Like, what more do I need to do? Or, like, is this it? Was really the question, because he has so many, the doctors call them comorbidities, so many things wrong that any one of them can take like a left turn and Dad's in trouble. And this was the first one. Besides the stomach surgeries, the honestly, like, you never expect that this is going to be the problem. Um, so what they did is they rushed Dad blood. Um, they actually had to scope him and find out where the internal bleeding was coming from, and they stopped it. So it was actually a good thing that they did that and they scoped it and stopped him. But on the other side, they have to now stop the blood thinners that he's on, and that also puts him at risk for his blood clots moving closer and closer to his lungs or his heart. So, but that was one of the hardest days we've had because I didn't know if Dad was going to be okay from that one. I really didn't. And I thought that I was going to lose him. So every horrible thought in my mind was just going through, is this it? Like, how much time do we have? Like, I'm not ready for this. I'm not prepared. Like, I don't know what to do. I had all of these questions that I couldn't answer. And so that was the day that, like, I almost lost Dad. And from here, like, from there on out, it was all progressing forward, I guess, to a point. But that day I wanted to specifically talk about because it was extremely hard. Um, Bless my wife, like, I got home and I just lost it, like, she had a drink for me at the bar outside, and I had to be in my thoughts and I had to be by myself because I don't want my family to share this pain, and I didn't want them to understand what I was going through. So that's why at some points I had to isolate myself. And so um, yeah, that was a tough one for sure. And so, he made it through that. Luckily, they gave him the 5 units of blood. Um, Went right back the next day, and he seemed to be on a much better path very quickly. So the blood was working, and so not that he was popping too and having conversations, but he was definitely like a little bit more. I wouldn't say vocal because he still didn't have his voice back, but he was a little bit more coherent, moving around and like nodding, shaking his head. Still no food at this point because he's on TPN, and he still couldn't eat anything. So, but yeah, that was the day of the blood transfusions. That was tough. Stay tuned.